She arrived 40 minutes early because she was afraid of being late. This was how Amara Okoi did most things, by adding buffer time to account for the version of events where something went wrong, where she misread the subway map or chose the wrong exit, or stood on the wrong side of the street for 12 minutes, before admitting to herself and the navigation app that she was, again, slightly lost in a city that had never fully decided to make itself easy for her. The cafe was called 11. It was inside a hotel she would not normally have reason to enter, the kind of hotel with a lobby that did not seem to have a ceiling, or had one so far above the ordinary human island that looking for it felt presumptuous. She had stood at the entrance for 30 seconds deciding whether her coat was acceptable before realizing that the decision had already been made, and the only variable left was how she carried it. She carried it well. She had learned this much. Inside, low gold lighting, the kind engineered to make everyone look slightly more significant than they actually were, and the sound of a piano being played somewhere unlocatable, and tables populated by people who moved through the space with the specific, unhurried ease of those for whom this level of environment was simply Tuesday. She found a corner table. She sat. She ordered a lemon water because she could not afford the coffee, and she was early enough that the performance of waiting was still in its first act. She thought about Jaiwoo, who had made the argument for this blind date with the specific, relentless warmth of a best friend who had decided your happiness was her project. You have been in Seoul for 2 years, Amara. You have exactly 2 friends. One of them is me. The other is a cactus. The cactus requires less and gives more. You need to go on this date. She had said yes because Jaiwoo was correct about the cactus. The blind date arrangement had come through the university's International Student Exchange Program, a social matching initiative that her advisor had recommended with the enthusiasm of someone who did not understand what it felt like to walk into a room and immediately calculate exactly how out of place you were. She was calculating now. She was the only black woman in the room. She was the only person in the room whose coat did not communicate the kind of money this room was calibrated for. She was the only person in the room alone, which in a space like this was its own kind of announcement. She looked at the menu and understood the pricing structure and put it down. She looked at the piano she still couldn't locate. She thought, 20 minutes. I will wait 20 minutes, and if he doesn't arrive, I will leave with dignity. She was at 12 minutes when the man sat down across from her. Not her blind date, he was too old, perhaps 65, silver-haired, in a dark suit that was impeccably simple. He moved with the careful ease of someone whose age had not diminished his authority but redistributed it into something quieter and more complete. He looked at her, he said, "Are you Miss Amara?" She said, "Yes." He said, "My son's sorry, he's late." His Korean was precise and his English was careful, and his eyes were warm in the specific way of people who had learned, through something, to look at the world very carefully. She looked at him. She thought, his father came, she thought. His father came to sit with me while his son was late, she thought. That is either the most considerate thing I have ever encountered or the beginning of something I do not have the context to understand, she said. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he said simply. And sat back and looked at her with the warm, assessing attention of a man who was genuinely interested in what he was seeing. I'm Chairman Kang, he said, and you are studying architecture. Yes, my son told me. She thought, his son told him about me, she thought. His son is late and his father is here, and somehow this is the first moment in 6 weeks that Seoul has felt less like a city that hasn't learned my name yet. Yes, she said. 2nd year. Your focus, he said. Adaptive reuse, she said. Taking structures that were built for one thing and understanding whether they can survive becoming something else. He looked at her, he said. That sounds less like architecture and more like wisdom. She looked at him. She thought, I like this man, she thought. I do not know him and I like him, and I am aware that is either his skill or my loneliness talking, and I cannot currently tell which. Chairman Kang smiled. He said, would you mind if I had some tea while we wait? Please, she said. He ordered tea. He asked her about Nigeria, not in the way that people asked as a conversational placeholder, but with genuine, specific curiosity, the kind that required actually listening to the answers. She found herself talking. She found herself, and this was the specific, startling thing, not performing the version of herself she performed in every public space in Seoul. Not making herself smaller or quieter or more palatable to the environment. Just talking, the way she talked to Jaiwoo, the way she talked to her mother on Sunday calls. Chairman Kang listened with the full, unhurried attention of someone for whom listening was not preparation for speaking, but the actual point. She told him about her mother's kitchen in Lagos, and the way she had learned the relationship between space and function by watching her mother organize a small room to hold an enormous life. She told him about the building on her street that had been a market, and then a clinic, and then a community meeting place without ever being rebuilt, only reinterpreted. She told him about arriving in Seoul and seeing the Han River for the first time and feeling the architecture of the city as a conversation between old things and new ones that were still figuring out what to say to each other. He said, "My late wife would have loved talking to you." Warmth in his voice did not disguise the weight of the word late. It carried it the way old wood carried the memory of the tree. She said, "I'm sorry," he said. She was extraordinary. She also talked about buildings the way other people talked about people. She said every space had a personality that you could feel it. "You can," Amara said. "Yes," he said. "I think you're right." She was looking at him when the temperature of the room changed, not dramatically, not with noise or announcement. Simply, something arrived. She felt it before she identified it. Then she looked toward the entrance. He was standing there. She would not have known him by the photograph Jaiwoo had found through the matching program, which had been a single image, blurry, poorly lit, telling her almost nothing about the person other than that he was Korean and male and possibly in his 30s. What the photograph had not conveyed was the specific quality of how he occupied a room. He was perhaps 35. Tall. Dark clothing. A jaw set with the particular precision of someone who had learned very young to keep their face from saying things their mind had not approved. His eyes moved across the room the way she thought this, and then thought it was strange that she thought it the way she moved across new spaces. Reading them, mapping them, filing everything, those eyes found the table, they found his father, they found her, they stayed. For 1 second, 2, 3, something happened in his expression that she did not have a name for, not warmth exactly. Something more like recognition, the internal click of a person encountering something that does not fit any existing category. Then it was gone. His face became the controlled, precise surface of a man who had made a decision about what to show. He crossed the room. He reached the table. He said to his father in Korean she understood enough of, "You came." His father said someone had to keep her company. "You were late." The son looked at his father. He said something shorter. His father smiled with the serene, unhurried quality of a man who has been winning specific arguments for a long time and does not need to announce the victories. Then the son looked at her. He said, "Amara." Miss Okoye, not a question. Her name in his voice with the specific quality of something that had been said before and was being said again. She thought he practiced it. She said Kang Minyi. He sat down. He looked at his father. His father looked at his tea. "She studies adaptive reuse," Chairman Kang said pleasantly. "We have been talking about buildings that become something else." Minyi looked at Amara. She looked at him. She thought, "He is terrifying," she thought. "He is also looking at me like I said something that required filing, and he is trying to figure out where to file it, and I recognize that expression because I use it too." She thought, "I am not going to think about that." "An architect," he said. "Architecture student," she said. "Second year, what's the difference?" he said. "About 4 years and a license," she said. Chairman Kang made a sound that was almost a laugh. Minyi looked at his father. His father looked at the piano. Minyi looked at Amara. Something very small moved in the controlled surface of his expression, she thought. He almost smiled, she thought. I should not be cataloguing whether he almost smiled. She looked at the menu. She thought 20 minutes has become 60 and I'm still here and I do not entirely understand why. She was supposed to leave after 20 minutes. She stayed. He was supposed to feel nothing. He didn't, and his father knew before either of them did. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments immediately and subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter of this. Because what comes next, nobody is ready. She did not know until much later what she had walked into. She did not know that Chairman Kang, who had spoken to her about late wives and buildings with personalities, and the specific, warm curiosity of a man with nothing to prove, was the architect of an empire that operated in spaces the law did not reach. She did not know that his son, who had looked at her with the specific recognition of a person filing something that didn't fit existing categories, was feared in ways that she had no vocabulary for, and would not have believed if she had been told. She walked home from the hotel at 10 o'clock through the Seoul night and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like the city had noticed her. She told Jaiwoo about the father. She described him, the warmth, the careful questions, the wife he missed, the laugh that was almost there when she said the thing about the 4 years. Jaiwoo said, "And the son," Amara said, "terrifying." Jaiwoo said, "Terrifying good or terrifying bad?" Amara thought about the recognition expression. She said, "I don't know yet." She meant it. She saw him again on Thursday, not at the hotel, at the university. In the library specifically, which was not a location that made any sense for him to be in. She was in the architecture section looking for a reference text her professor had assigned, and which the library had 1 copy of, and she had been the one to check it out, which meant she was carrying it when she turned the corner of the reference shelf and found him standing 4 feet away. He was not looking at books. He was looking at the space. He held the quality she had catalogued at the hotel, reading the room, mapping it, but more openly now without the controlled surface deployed for a public event. He looked like someone who had decided, alone in a library section that was mostly empty, that he did not need to perform. He looked human. She stopped. He heard her stop. He turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "You don't seem like someone who uses the university library." He said, "I don't." "Then why?" "I had a meeting nearby," he said. She looked at the reference shelves. She thought, "The architecture section is on the 3rd floor of the East Building. There is no meeting nearby unless the meeting was specifically in this building on this floor." She looked at him. She said, "Okay." She moved past him to the shelf she needed. She pulled the text. She turned around. He was still standing there. He said, "Adaptive reuse." She said, "What?" He said, "You said you study adaptive reuse. Buildings that survive becoming something else." She looked at him. She said, "Yes." He said, "Does it always work, the becoming something else?" She held the text. She thought about this genuinely. She said, "No, some buildings are too committed to what they were. The structure is built so specifically for one purpose that trying to use it for another breaks something essential." She paused. "But most of them are more flexible than they look. Most things are." He held her gaze. She thought, he is not asking about buildings. She thought, I am not sure he knows he is not asking about buildings. She said, "Why are you actually here?" He said, "I told you. Meeting." "I know what you said." She said, "I'm asking the other thing." He held her gaze. He said, "My father talked about you for 3 days. She stared at him. She said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "After the cafe, he talked about you. He talked about the building on your street in Lagos. He talked about adaptive reuse. He talked about your mother's kitchen." He paused. "He talked about you the way he used to talk about my mother." Library was very quiet. She said, Yes," he said. She said, "He doesn't even know me." "No," Minnie said, "he doesn't." He held her gaze. He knew her for 30 years and she talked about buildings the same way. She held the text. She looked at the shelf. She thought, I do not know what to do with this information. She thought, I do not know what this man wants from this conversation. She thought, I do not know why my hands are slightly less steady than they were 3 minutes ago. "I have to study," she said. "I know," he said. She walked to the table. She sat down. She opened the text. She did not read a single page of it in the following 20 minutes. He left without her seeing him go. She was aware of the exact moment the room's temperature returned to normal. She thought, that is important information and I am choosing not to examine it. She examined it all the way home. Chairman Kang called her on a Saturday. Not Min Yi, his father, who had apparently obtained her number through the blind date coordination program, and who called at 10 in the morning with the pleasant, unhurried quality of someone who had decided on Saturday morning to talk to a person they found interesting. He asked about her dissertation project. She told him. He asked questions that were genuinely informed. He knew about specific architects, specific movements, specific debates in the field that she had not expected from a man she had categorized, however incompletely, as belonging to a world that was not about buildings. She asked how he knew. He said, "My wife was an architect. Not professionally, she never practiced. But she studied and she cared, and for 30 years I listened carefully." She said, "You learned architecture by loving someone who loved it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Yes, that is exactly it." She looked at her apartment. She thought about the cactus on her windowsill. She thought about 30 years of careful listening. She said, "What was she like?" He told her. He talked for 20 minutes about a woman named Kang Soo-yeon who had grown up in Daegu and had moved to Seoul to study and had met him through an introduction arranged by her family that she had attended. She later told him, only because she did not want to be rude, Amara said. She didn't want to go on the blind date. He said, "She absolutely did not want to go on the blind date." She said, "What changed her mind?" He said, "I was early. I sat with her for 40 minutes before I was supposed to arrive, pretending to be someone else entirely." She stared at her wall. She thought he arrived early. She thought he sat with someone who was waiting. She thought that was not an accident. She said, "You planned the whole thing." He said pleasantly, "I planned nothing. I simply arrived early." She said, "Does Minnie know you do this?" A pause. "He knows I have opinions," Chairman Kang said. "About many things." "About him," she said. "About what's good for him," he said. "Which he does not always agree with." She thought about a man in a library who had come to a place that made no logical sense for a meeting and had stood in the architecture section talking about buildings that survived becoming something else. She thought, did his father tell him to go there? She thought, I should ask. She did not ask, because she thought, if his father told him to go there, I don't want to know. And if his father didn't, I want to sit with that for a moment. "Chairman Kang," she said. He said, "What are you doing?" She said, he said warmly, "Having a very pleasant conversation on a Saturday morning." She thought, he is the most dangerous person I have spoken to in months and he is doing it with complete plausible deniability and I somehow find this delightful. "Your son is terrifying," she said. He said, "Yes." She said, "That doesn't bother you," he said. He is terrifying in the way that most things worth loving are terrifying, because they are real and they cost something and the cost is uncertain. She held her phone, she thought, he is telling me something, she thought, he is telling me something about his son, she thought, he is doing it in a way that I cannot call out directly because it is technically a general observation, she thought, he is very good at this. I should study, she said. Of course, he said. Amara, she paused. He notices everything, Chairman Kang said. He always has since he was a child. He notices things and files them and does not tell you what he has filed because he was taught that keeping what you value to yourself is the same as protecting it. A pause. He was taught incorrectly, but it took a very long time to see that. She held the phone, she said. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because I am an old man who loves his son and would like him to stop being so unhappy. He ended the call. She sat in her apartment. She thought about a Mafia patriarch calling her on a Saturday morning to tell her in the most careful possible terms that his son had noticed her. She thought, I am in a very strange situation, she thought. I have been in strange situations before, she thought. None of them have involved anyone whose father called on Saturdays. He appeared 4 more times in the next 2 weeks. She kept count. Once, outside the architecture building at 7 p.m. when she was leaving a studio session late, and he was apparently taking a phone call on the steps of a building that was nowhere near anything she understood him to be connected to. And their eyes met for 3 seconds before he looked back at his phone. Twice at the campus convenience store at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, where she was buying ramen and he was buying nothing, standing near the refrigerated section holding a water bottle he did not purchase. 3 times, at the bus stop near her apartment, which was in a neighborhood that had no connection to any world she associated with him, at 8 in the morning, reading something on his phone. He looked up when she arrived. He said, the number 11 bus is running late today. She said, I know, I checked. She got on the bus. He did not. 4 times in the courtyard of her faculty building, sitting on a bench with the specific inhabited stillness of someone waiting. She had walked past him twice before she stopped and stood in front of him and said, are you following me? He looked up. He said, I had a meeting. She said, here. He said, nearby. She said, you keep having meetings nearby. He said, I'm a busy person. She looked at him. She thought about the library and my father talked about you for 3 days and a phone call on a Saturday morning, and he notices everything and does not tell you what he has filed. She said, Minyi, he said. Yes, she said, I'm going to need you to be slightly more honest with me than you're currently being. He held her gaze. He said, there was an issue with the Scholarship Coordination Office. I was advised that there had been an error in processing that might affect your funding status. I came to verify it was resolved. She stared at him. She said, you came to verify my scholarship was processed correctly. He said, yes, she said, in person to my faculty building. He said, the administrative office is here. The Scholarship Coordination Office is on the North Campus, she said. This is the South Campus. They are separated by 15 minutes. He held her gaze. He said, I wanted to make sure it was done. She looked at him. She thought, he fixed my scholarship. She thought there was probably an actual problem and he actually fixed it, she thought, and he did not tell me about it because he, did not want me to feel indebted, did not want me to know he was involved, was trying to, she thought, he is trying to protect what he values by keeping it to himself, she thought, his father told me this, she thought, his father told me exactly this. Thank you, she said, he said, it was administrative, she said, Minyi. He said, yes, she said, thank you. He held her gaze. Something moved in the controlled surface of his expression, just briefly. She thought, he is not used to being thanked for things he does quietly. She thought, that is a specific kind of lonely. She sat down on the bench beside him, not beside him exactly, there was appropriate distance. But the same bench, she said. Your father called me on Saturday. He closed his eyes briefly, she said. He told me about your mother. He said, what did he say? She said. That she talked about buildings the way other people talked about people. He was quiet, she said, and that he listened carefully for 30 years. He looked at the courtyard, she looked at the courtyard. They sat in the autumn afternoon that was cooling toward winter, and she thought about adaptive reuse and buildings that survived becoming something else. She thought, most things are more flexible than they look, she thought, most people are. Someone stole her materials on a Monday, not accidentally, deliberately. Her final project models, 3 weeks of work, taken from the studio's shared storage during the weekend. She arrived Monday morning and opened her designated shelf and found it empty and stood in front of it for a long moment and did the specific, internal calculation of someone who has been working 2 jobs to afford supplies she cannot afford to lose. She did not cry. She was past the point where crying about stolen things was available to her. She was at the stage of grief that was just arithmetic, what it would cost to replace how many extra shifts that required, whether the timeline was survivable. She reported it to the studio coordinator. She went to her 9 o'clock lecture. She made a list of what needed to be replaced. She looked at the list. She thought, 6 weeks of evening shifts. She thought, The final review is in 5 weeks. She thought, okay. On Tuesday morning she went to the studio early. Her shelf was not empty. It held, she stood in front of it for a very different kind of moment than Monday, new materials. Not identical to what had been taken. Better. Professional-grade balsa wood, proper architectural film, the cutting tools she had been making do without for 2 semesters. A note, handwritten on plain card, for the project. No name. She held the card. She thought about Jaiwoo, who could not afford this and would have told her if she had somehow managed it. She thought about the scholarship that had been fixed quietly. She thought about 4 accidental appearances in 2 weeks. She thought about a man who had been taught that keeping what you value to yourself is the same as protecting it. She said, Min-yi. He was not there, but she said it anyway. She said it the way you said something when you wanted the universe to carry it to the right place. She thought, he is going to deny this. She thought, I am not going to ask him directly. She thought, I am going to let him have this one. She put the card in her bag. She sat down at her desk. She started building. The storm arrived on a Thursday evening with the specific Seoul winter aggression of weather that had decided to make a point. She was halfway between the campus and her apartment when it happened, the specific, immediate thoroughness of a downpour that made umbrellas feel optimistic. She was wearing the coat, which was not waterproof, and she had been making good time until suddenly she was not making any time at all because the rain was horizontal, and the nearest shelter was a covered bus stop 20 meters away. She ran, she reached the bus stop. She was already substantially wet. She stood under the shelter and looked at her coat and did the calculation of whether it would dry before morning. A black car pulled up. The window came down. Min-yi looked at her from the driver's seat. He said, get in. She said, I'm fine. He said, you're soaked. She said, it's rain. He said, Amara. She held his gaze through the rain. She thought, I am choosing dignity over dry. She thought, I am also very cold. She got in. The car was warm in the specific, immediate way of well-heated things, and it smelled like cedar and something clean. She sat in the passenger seat and dripped slightly and did not apologize for the dripping because she had not asked to be in a situation where dripping was relevant. He drove. He did not speak. She looked at the rain on the windows. She said, how did you know where I was? He said, I was nearby. She said, meeting. He said, yes. She said, I don't actually believe you have this many meetings. He said, I have a great number of meetings. She looked at him. He looked at the road. She thought, he is never going to tell me. She thought, he is going to protect this by keeping it to himself, and I am going to sit in his warm car and be wet and not ask. She thought, I understand this and I find it both frustrating and unreasonably endearing. She said, thank you for the materials. He said, I don't know what you mean. She said, yes you do. He said, the studio probably replaced them through the damage fund. She said, there is no architecture studio damage fund, Min-yi. He drove. The rain made the Seoul streets into mirrors. She watched the city slide past and thought about buildings that survived becoming something else. About the way the structure of a thing often remained even when everything else changed. My mother drew, he said. She turned. He was looking at the road. He said, buildings. Spaces. She used to draw the rooms she wanted to live in someday. She never built any of them, but she kept the drawings. He paused. My father kept them after. He still has them. She held very still. She thought, he is telling me something. She thought, he is telling me something about his family and his grief and the drawings his mother left. He thought, he is doing it in the careful way he does everything, obliquely, with deniability, leaving me room to not make too much of it if I choose. She said, what were the rooms like? He said, warm, full of light. She drew the same window several times, south-facing, wide, the kind that makes a room feel like it extends outside itself. She said, adaptive. He glanced at her. She said, the window, making the interior feel larger by connecting it to what's outside. That's the principle. He looked at the road. He said, yes. She said, she would have been good at it. He said, she was good at everything. Car was very quiet except for the rain. She thought, he misses her. She thought, he misses her the way his father does, and he carries it the same way, quietly, filed away, not announced. She thought, I understand that. She put her hand on the center console, not on his hand beside it. In the space between them, she said, I'm sorry you lost her. He looked at her hand. He looked at the road. He moved his hand. His fingers were next to hers, not touching, almost touching, the specific geography of 2 people arriving at the same location by different routes. His phone rang. He answered it with his other hand. His voice, which had been different, softer, less controlled, the version she had been beginning to understand was the real one, returned to the surface it wore for the world. He spoke in Korean. Short sentences. Specific, flat efficiency of someone managing something serious. He pulled over. He said, I have to go back. She said, I know. She opened the door. She looked at him. She said, Min-yi. He looked at her. She said, next time it rains, I'll be fine. He said, I know you will. She got out. She stood on the pavement in the rain that had eased slightly. She thought, almost. She thought, everything with him is almost. She walked home. She was not thinking about being wet. Daewoo found it on a Wednesday. She had been doing the thing Jaiwoo did, which was involve herself in other people's administrative situations with the specific, cheerful thoroughness of someone who considered bureaucracy a personal opponent. And she had been looking into the scholarship processing error that had apparently been resolved, and she had found something while looking. She called Amara, she said, the Kang Foundation. Amara said, what about it? Jaiwoo said, your scholarship. The International Architecture Scholarship that your tuition is paid through, the disbursing entity. Amara held the phone. Jaiwoo said, the Kang Foundation. Amara sat down. Jaiwoo said, the Kang Foundation is connected to Amara, it's connected to the Kang Group, which is a very large holding company with a very complicated history and several entities that are the subject of ongoing discussion in some significant circles. Amara said, how significant? Jaiwoo said, significant enough that if you search the name in the wrong databases you get information that you did not expect to find on a Wednesday afternoon. Amara held the phone. She thought about Chairman Kang in the hotel cafe with his warm questions and his careful listening and his wife who drew south-facing windows. She thought about 4 accidental appearances. She thought about materials that appeared on her shelf. She thought about a scholarship processing error that was resolved without her needing to ask. She thought it was never an accident. She thought, I have been connected to this family for longer than I knew, she thought, and none of them told me. Jaiwoo said, Amara, are you? I'm fine, she said. That's what you say when you're not fine, Jaiwoo said. I know, she said. She ended the call. She thought about the library and the car and the bench in the autumn courtyard. She thought, he knew the whole time. She thought he knew I was a scholarship recipient. He knew my name before the blind date. He knew. She thought, what did he know? She thought, what did any of them know? She picked up her phone. She called Minyi. He answered on the second ring. She said, the Kang Foundation. Silence. She said, my scholarship. He said, Amara, did you know? She said. He said, yes. She held the phone. She thought about, I came to verify your scholarship was processed correctly. She thought he was not fixing an error. He was fixing something that should not have had a problem in the first place because his family's foundation was the disbursing entity. She said, since the beginning. He said, yes. She said, the cafe, the blind date, you knew who I was before you arrived. He said, I knew your name was on the scholarship roster. I didn't. He stopped. The blind date arrangement was separate. It was organized through the university program. I knew your name when it came through. She said, but you said nothing. He said, no. She said, why? He was quiet for a long moment. He said, because I wanted to know who you were, not who the file said you were. She held the phone. She thought, he is telling me the truth. She thought, he is telling me the truth in the careful, oblique way he tells everything, leaving room for me not to make too much of it. She thought, I am going to make a great deal of it. She said, I need some time. He said, I know. She ended the call. She sat in her apartment. She thought about adaptive reuse and buildings that survived becoming something else. She thought, what is this becoming? She thought, I don't know yet. She thought, that is either the most frightening or the most honest thing I have felt in 2 years. She saw them on a Friday. She had not been looking for him. She had been trying not to look for him, which was its own kind of looking. The specific, exhausting discipline of a person who had decided to think about other things and found the other things kept having him in them. She was crossing the lobby of a building she had come to for an architecture lecture, and they were by the entrance, Minyi. And a woman she did not recognize who was the specific, curated kind of beautiful that announced itself as intentional, someone who had been prepared in some way for public significance. Elegant, composed, standing beside him with the comfortable proximity of someone who had a claim on the space. They were not touching. They were not looking at each other with anything she could name specifically as romantic. But the proximity was the specific quality of 2 people whose connection had a history, a context, a set of understandings that did not require the current moment to establish them. Amara stopped walking. She stood in the lobby. She thought, I should not be feeling what I am currently feeling. She thought, I do not have a claim on this. She thought, I have spent 3 days deciding to think about other things, and here I am feeling specifically, precisely jealous in a building lobby. She turned. She went back the way she had come. She was at the door when she heard her name. She turned. Minyi had crossed the lobby. He was alone. She thought, he saw me. She thought, he left the other conversation to. She said, I was late for something. He said, the lecture doesn't start for 20 minutes. She said, I know the schedule. He said, so you were leaving. She held her bag. She said, who is she? He held her gaze. He said, Han So-yeon. She is. He paused. A business connection. She said she seemed like more than a business connection. He held her gaze. He said, it's complicated. She thought about complicated. She thought about a word that functioned as a holding space for everything you were not yet willing to say directly. She said, Minyi. He said, yes. She said, I am going to ask you something and I would like you to answer it honestly. He said, yes. She said, is there something between you and her? He held her gaze. He said, there is an arrangement. That my family has been. He stopped. That was arranged before the cafe. She thought arranged, she thought before the cafe, she thought he arrived at the blind date knowing an arrangement already existed. She said, you came on the blind date knowing you were already committed to someone. He said, the arrangement is complicated. She said, he was quiet. She looked at the lobby. She thought I was right. She thought I told myself not to. She thought I was right. She said, I have a lecture. She left. She did not look back. She sat in the lecture and heard nothing. She thought about adaptive reuse. She thought, some buildings are too committed to what they were. She thought, the structure is built so specifically for one purpose that trying to use it for another breaks something essential. She thought I should have remembered that. She heard them on a Thursday. She had gone to the wrong room for a department meeting, a routing error in the university's scheduling system, and had opened a door into what turned out to be a smaller conference room occupied. Two men she did not know. Speaking Korean, she partially understood. She understood enough, she understood. The Kang boy and the Nigerian girl and leverage, and a word she knew from her Korean language course that meant use. She closed the door quietly. She stood in the hallway. She thought, I am leverage. She thought, someone wants to use me against him. She thought, that means he has something they want and I am something he. She thought, he would not let me be leverage unless I. She thought, unless I mattered enough to be leverage. She went to the correct room. She sat in the meeting. She heard nothing. She thought about the proximity of Han So-yeon and the arrangement that existed before the cafe. She thought about a man who kept having meetings nearby. She thought, he has been near me because of this. She thought, not entirely, but partly. She thought, and I cannot tell which part is which. She went home. She called Jaiwoo. Jaiwoo said, tell me. She told her. Jaiwoo was quiet for a moment, then, Amara, I need you to hear me. I'm listening, she said. Kang Foundation, the scholarship, the blind date, the accidental appearances, that is not a coincidence architecture. That is a structure. Someone built that. Jaiwoo paused. I think the question is whether it was built to protect you or to position you. Amara held the phone. She thought, he notices everything and does not tell you what he has filed. She thought, he was taught that keeping what you value to yourself is the same as protecting it. She thought, was taught incorrectly. She said, I think someone built it to protect me. Jaiwoo said, are you sure? She thought about the library. She thought about the rain. She thought about the bench. She thought about her name in his voice with the quality of something said before. She said, no, she said, but I think that's what it is. He disappeared on a Saturday, not physically, not from Seoul, not from existence, from her. Messages he didn't respond to. The bench in the faculty courtyard unoccupied. The accidental appearances that had been regular as weather simply ceasing. She waited a week before she admitted to herself that she was waiting. She waited another week before she admitted to herself that the waiting felt like something specific and named. She texted, are you all right? No response. She texted, I heard something last week that I think you should know about. No response. She called voicemail. Jaiwoo said, he's pulling away. She said, I noticed. Jaiwoo said, why do you think? She thought about the conference room and leverage and a word that meant use. She thought, he found out. She thought, he found out I was being watched and he is doing what he does, protecting what he values by keeping it to himself. She thought, keeping me away from him is the same as protecting me. She thought, and I hate that I understand this. She thought, I hate that I understand the architecture of a person who pushes away what matters most because the cost of proximity is danger. She said, he thinks distance is safety. Jaiwoo said, is he wrong? She said, I don't know. She looked at her apartment, the cactus on the windowsill. She thought about Jaiwoo saying the cactus requires less and gives more. She thought, I am not going to be a cactus about this. She called Chairman Kang. He answered. She said, he's gone quiet. Chairman Kang said, yes. She said, he found out about the threat. He said, she said, and he thinks pulling away will protect me. He said, she said, tell me what to do. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Amara, I cannot tell you what to do. I can tell you what I know. Tell me, she said. He said, when he was 12 he had a dog. A small, completely unremarkable dog that he had found in the street and brought home and was told he could not keep, and so he kept it secretly for 3 months in his room, fed from his own meals, walked before anyone else was awake. He paused. When it was discovered, his grandfather made him give it away, not because of the dog. To teach him that attachment was liability. She held the phone. He has spent 20 years, Chairman Kang said, not keeping things, not namming them, not letting them be findable. He paused. You were the first thing in a very long time that he stopped. She said, that he what? Chairman Kang said, that he did not file away immediately. She held the phone. She thought, I was not filed. She thought, everything in his world gets filed and I was not filed. She thought, that is what recognition means. Not that you recognize a stranger, that you encounter something that does not have a category. She said, how do I reach him? Chairman Kang said, show up. She said, where? He told her. She bought the ticket on a Tuesday, not because she had decided to leave, because deciding to leave was the only leverage she had. She needed him to know that the distance he was maintaining had consequences, that the cost of keeping her safe through absence was that she would eventually build a life without the absence in it. She told Chairman Kang. He was quiet. She said, I'm not doing it to manipulate him. He said, I know, she said. I'm doing it because I need to know if she stopped. I need to know if the silence is protection or if it's just silence. He said, I understand. She said, what will you do? He said, what I always do. A pause, arrive early. She packed one bag, she went to the airport on a Thursday, she sat at the gate. She thought about Nigeria, which was home, which was her mother's kitchen and the building on her street, and the way the city she had grown up in was still, after everything, the place that fit her without trying. She thought about Seoul, which had been cold and difficult and which had, against considerable odds, also given her something she had not expected. She thought, both things can be true, she thought. The building can be what it was and also what it became, she thought, that is the principle. An hour before her flight she looked up. Chairman Kang was walking toward her gate, same suit as the first night. Same careful, unhurried quality of movement. He sat down across from her. He said, are you Miss Amara? She stared at him. He said with the same warm, precise care of the very first evening, my son's sorry he's late. She looked at the gate, she looked at the entrance, she looked at the gate, she looked at Chairman Kang. She said, is he coming? He said, he's trying. She said, what does that mean? He said, it means he is a man who has spent his life making things simpler by making himself smaller. And coming here is the opposite of that. She held her boarding pass. She thought, I will wait. She thought, I will wait because waiting is the only architecture I have left. She waited. The announcement came at boarding. She stood. She looked at the entrance. She sat back down. Chairman Kang sat with her. He did not speak. She thought, he is not coming. She thought, this is what it looks like when the structure is too committed to what it was. She thought, I was wrong about the flexibility. Final boarding call. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Chairman Kang. She said, tell him. The entrance doors opened. Chaos, not the polished, controlled movement she associated with him. The specific human chaos of someone who had been running, dark clothing, a cut above his left eyebrow that had been bleeding and had been roughly addressed. The breathing of someone who had moved through something and come out the other side still moving. He looked across the terminal. He found her. He walked. He did not stop until he was in front of her. She looked at the cut. She said, what happened to you? He said, I ended something that needed ending. She said, are you all right? He said, I will be. She held her boarding pass. She looked at him. She thought, he is here. She thought, he came through something and kept coming. She thought, that is the only architecture that matters. She said, you ignored my messages for 3 weeks. He said, yes. She said, you disappeared. He said, yes. She said, why? He held her gaze. He said, because I heard what they were planning to do with you, and I thought the safest version of you was the version that didn't know me. She said, you were wrong. He said, I know. She said, the safest version of me is the one that knows the truth. He said, I know. She said, so tell me the truth. He held her gaze. He said, I have been terrified since the cafe. She held the boarding pass. He said, not of you, of what it felt like to look at you and not be able to file it. I file everything. Everything in my life has a place and a function and a category. You didn't. He paused. I have been in this position for 3 months trying to make you fit somewhere that wouldn't cost everything and you don't. You require everything. She said, that sounds like a complaint. He said, it's not. He said, it's the first thing in a very long time that has required something real from me. He said, I came because losing you felt worse than everything I was protecting by not coming. Terminal was doing its terminal thing, the noise, the announcements, the specific, relentless indifference of a transport hub to any individual story occurring within it. None of it reached her. She looked at him. She thought every silence was fear. She thought every distance was protection. She thought every cold moment hid something that did not have a category. She said, Kang Minyi. He said, yes. She said, I'm not leaving. He held her gaze. Something in the controlled surface of his expression did the thing it had been doing since the cafe, that fractional, specific movement that preceded the almost smile that she had been cataloguing for 3 months. This time it arrived, not almost, completely. He said, I know. She said, I just needed to know you'd come. He said, I know that too. Behind them, Chairman Kang stood from his seat. He picked up his jacket. He looked at his son. He looked at Amara. He said to no one in particular, in the pleasant, unhurried tone of a man who had arranged something and watched it succeed, she draws south-facing windows. He walked away. She looked at Minyi. He looked at her. She thought about the building on her street in Lagos that had been a market and then a clinic and then a community meeting place without ever being rebuilt. She thought, some things survive by becoming what they need to be. She thought, the structure holds. She thought everything else is interpretation. She said, your father is terrifying. He said, yes. She said, I find it delightful. He said, I have noticed. She put the boarding pass in her bag. She thought, start here. She thought, the rest comes after. She thought, everything is adaptive reuse. She thought, everything is. Outside the terminal, Seoul was being Seoul, enormous, alive, completely indifferent to the specific weight of what had happened inside it. Chairman Kang walked to his car. He looked at his phone. He smiled the way he had smiled since a Saturday morning phone call about buildings with personalities and kitchens that held enormous lives. He thought about his wife. He thought about south-facing windows and rooms full of light. He thought she would have liked her. He thought she would have seen it immediately. He got in his car. He went home. Behind him, in the terminal, two people who had spent 3 months almost saying things were finally saying them. The city moved. The story continued. The structure held one terminal, one father who arrived early twice, and a mafia heir who finally stopped filing away the one thing that didn't fit any category. If this story lived in you, if every almost moment made you feel it, you know what to do. Like this video immediately. Subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. Where are you watching from? And tell me which moment destroyed you. The bench in the courtyard, the rain. Or I came because losing you felt worse than everything I was protecting. Tell me everything. New story next week. Same promise, impossible to stop. I'll see you there.